Now it's time to get controversial, okay? Everybody, let's just keep the peace here. Keep the peace. Was the American Revolution morally legitimate according to the principles of Catholic just war theory?
I'm a proud patriot and remain a proud patriot. I kind of picture myself in Mel Gibson's role in The Patriot. You should see me with a tomahawk, man.
In terms of the just war, in terms of going into the war, oh, do I have some opinions about that? The foundational philosophies of the American Revolution, I would say, are incompatible with Catholicism. I would say that in terms of the principal beginning of the American Revolution, that it was not just.
Let's jump into this one, Father. Anonymous is asking, was the American Revolution morally legitimate according to the principles of Catholic just war theory?
I think that is an excellent question. So if you want to look at what the church teaches about war and just war, I believe it's Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 2309. And so there's basically four classic criteria for a just war. It has to be a just cause. The reason for the war has to be something that's just. It has to be called by a competent authority. There has to be a right intention and a probability for success. So when I look at the case of the American Revolution, I mean, I'm sure there are some people that could honestly, in some ways, argue both ways on this. But it would seem to me that unnecessary taxation could be a just cause. They wanted to, or even they don't even need a reason. Maybe just wanting to be free, wanting to be our own land and do our own thing with our own sovereignty. I don't know that a land needs a reason to want to be sovereign, but if the people of that land and the people of that area decide they want to be sovereign, perhaps they could have a right to do so. That's arguable as well. Otherwise, so one could argue against the just intentions of the benevolent ruler. I think that, you could definitely say there was a just cause, at least that the revolutionaries certainly believed their cause to be just, and that the people who lived here, they were called the war, declared the war, and that the intention was to secure justice and peace, and that certainly is the right intention. And that there was a reasonable belief that the outcome would be favorable. So I would say, I would say too, you probably could also make an argument the other way if you tried really hard. It's something that can go both ways. I'm a proud patriot and remain a proud patriot. So I'd like to think that I would be fighting on the side. I kind of picture myself in Mel Gibson's role in The Patriot. You should see me with a tomahawk, man. So hilarious. I would say that the classic just war criteria from Augustine, and St. Thomas Aquinas, that the American Revolution, yes, would, in my humble yet correct opinion, meet that criteria.
Yeah, especially when you consider, they did have a plan for governance afterwards, so that checks that box as well. But great question. I will reserve my comments on this. I will say I'm a monarchist, just like Jordan Pacheco was before me as well. So even if there was a Protestant king, I understand the qualms about that. I'd probably be not the American patriot. But anyway, now it's time to get controversial, okay? Everybody, let's just keep the peace here. Keep the peace. Anonymous is asking for clarification. Father, could you please answer the question, was the American Revolution a just war? They're wanting to get your side of the argument.
When we talk about just war, there's sort of the different phases that need to be considered. So when we talk about just war theory, there's the justice in going to the war, the justice during the war, and then justice after the war. I can't necessarily speak to all of that. In terms of the justice after the war, there's definitely a question when you have all these people escaping up to Canada because they don't want to live here anymore, right? There was refugees in a certain sense leaving the colonies to go back up to Canada, presumably because they didn't feel safe in the new independent country. And if that's the case, then it's hard to say that it was just afterwards. In terms of just during, I guess you'd have to look at the individual battles and the way that warfare is being carried out by the American side. I don't know enough details to go into that. But in terms of the just war, in terms of going into the war, oh, do I have some opinions about that? So to start with, the foundational philosophies of the American Revolution, I would say, are incompatible with Catholicism, because a lot of them were springing from Enlightenment ideas that were very, in a sense, humanistic and not really grounded in the Catholic political tradition. And so going all the way back to first, where does authority to govern come from? You know, the Enlightenment ideas, well, it comes from the consent of the government, the governed. So you have the social contract, and the authority of the rulers comes from the consent of the governed. Now, Catholic political philosophy, basing itself on sacred scripture, Revelation would say, no, it comes from God. Like St. Paul makes it very clear that all political authority comes from God. And later, Catholic philosophers and theologians will say, okay, it doesn't matter what type of government you have. It could be democratic, it could be a monarchy, it could be like a Senate that Rome used to have, whatever it might be, an aristocracy. However they get into power, if they're elected or appointed or hereditary, whatever, once they're in power, their authority to rule comes from God, not from the consent of the people. And so that's like a major issue with the foundational principles of the American Revolution. The other issue is going to be this idea of, well, there's the state of nature where everyone was just kind of on their own, and they voluntarily gave up some of that in order to form society, and again, the social contract and then government. But unless you were Adam, you were never alone. So this is a completely like fictitious situation. The Adam was the only human person who's ever just alone, completely detached from dependence on any other human person. And so that idea doesn't have any foundation either in Catholic political philosophy. And we do follow, in a certain sense, what Aristotle says, that man is a social creature and it's natural for man to live in society. And so just from the bat off, we're starting off like not on a good foot in terms of these justifications for the American Revolution, citing that there was a breach in the social contract with the King of England and Parliament and the colonists. The other thing that I would call into question about the American Revolution is the virtue of piety. So the virtue of piety is a virtue under justice. So justice is the virtue by which we render to those what is due to them. And then there's certain forms of that. Religion is one, but there's also piety, where we're supposed to offer a certain amount of respect and devotion, support to those who we owe our existence and our way of existence, which we can never, in a sense, pay back. So this is primarily given to parents and also to our country. And there is a reason why you call your country your motherland and your fatherland. It's not just poetic, but because you actually have a certain debt to your country because of the things it provided you, which you can, in a sense, never pay back, like protection and just things like that. And so the problem is that when you have them breaking away from their fatherland, their motherland, however they wanted to call it, because they did, if you read the writings of the revolutionaries, they do say that they are British citizens, at least at the beginning, and then they break away. So this would be a major break of piety, of breaking away from your mother country and forming your own. And if you do look at political philosophers in the Catholic tradition, I have yet to find one that says breaking away from your country and finding a new one is okay. They will say that in certain circumstances, it is possible to overthrow an unjust government or an unjust ruler, sort of following the just war theory of proportionality, but never do they say, well, if it's really bad, you can just separate and start doing your own thing. And so for all those reasons, I would say that in terms of the principal beginning of the American Revolution, that it was not just from the Catholic point of view, again, because it's starting from non-Catholic political positions and positions which are incompatible with Catholicism. And then also because it's violating this virtue of piety, which we should have towards, not necessarily towards the government, but towards the country. So those are things that we always need to kind of consider there.
That is true. Anonymous, thank you for asking the question again. And last night I was kind of ruminating on this, and I asked my robot, give me positions for and against according to these principles that Augustine laid out, and then also lay it out, because eventually there was a Thomistic perspective on this. And one of the things that it mentioned as a Thomistic difficulty was that Britain wasn't a totalitarian or murderous regime. So like political grievances don't automatically constitute tyranny, according to Aquinas. What do you think about that, Father?
Yes, that's true.
Would you say that's accurate?
Yes. So according to the Thomistic definition, that tyranny is not just a government that's making your life more difficult, but it's a government who has basically changed the purpose into just enriching those in government, as opposed to trying to benefit those that are governed. So just because the government is making your life more difficult, if it's for a proportional reason, then it might actually be just. So, but I do have some more thoughts. Maybe we can return to this after we get back. We can just maybe back up a little bit. So before the American Revolution, there was the 7 Years' War, right, as it was called, on the continent in Europe, and then it spilled over into North America as the French and Indian War, right? And so once that was over, Britain had expended a lot of manpower and wealth to defend the colonies during this conflict. And they were like, hey, can you please help pay this back? And the colonies are basically like, no, how dare you? And we're just like, okay, that's a little weird. And they're like, well, no taxation without representation. So again, this goes back to what we said before the break, in that this also is not a Catholic principle. A hereditary non-elected monarch can pass taxes that are binding in conscience on his subjects, even if he was never elected, as long as those taxes are just and fair. And so just this general principle of no taxation without representation, again, it's another one of those sort of, false starting points from a Catholic point of view, because we wouldn't recognize that as a legitimate principle. So you have that. And then sort of what you were touching on right before the break is that we can be critical of the founding of the United States, and that doesn't make us bad citizens. Because eventually the United States, regardless of the condition of its founding, did gain legitimacy, political legitimacy, probably through the signing of the Treaty of Paris there at the end of the Revolution, where the Great Britain and the other powers recognized it as an independent country. So once it became legitimate, then that became the new patria, the new motherland or fatherland to those that were there. And so that means for us who have been born here in the past, 200 some odd years, or have immigrated here during that time, and this has become our new fatherland or motherland, then we do owe that virtue of piety to the country of the United States, again, the country, and that we should be good and patriotic citizens within the bounds of proper Catholic teaching and morality. So we don't necessarily need to celebrate, this founding if we have issues with it, but we can have that virtue of piety or patriotism, as we would call it today, towards the country, which has now become a motherland or a fatherland.
We're gonna get critiques. Well, then don't celebrate 4th of July, okay? Look, I'm gonna grill up some hot dogs that day. I may even shoot off some fireworks that day, okay? It's a great point you made there at the end, Father. This is our country now, and it's we're kind of very far off from the founding. So, yeah, great advice. Thank you, Anonymous, for that question. Fantastic question.